In most places the people seemed glad to have him as their ruler, and gave him a warm welcome and feasted his soldiers. He had only words of kindness for everyone, even for those who were against him, and he won hosts of friends and supporters all along his route. There was great alarm at Rome when it was learned that Caesar was advancing towards the city. The supporters of Pompey became terrified, and the rich nobles gathered up their money and other valuables and fled. Pompey could do nothing to defend the city against Caesar, and at last he too ran away. He went to Greece to raise an army to fight Caesar. When Caesar arrived at Rome, he met with no opposition. He entered the city amid shouts of welcome from the people. He harmed no one, but he set up a new government and organized a new senate. He was now the master spirit of the republic. After arranging everything to his satisfaction in Rome, he went to Spain and defeated Pompey's generals there. Then he came back and turned his attention to Pompey himself. In the meantime, Pompey had been very busy gathering an army in the eastern countries controlled by Rome. In one way and another he collected 50,000 men. They were stationed on the coast of Macedonia and Greece. There they waited for Caesar and his army to cross the Adriatic Sea to give them battle. Caesar had a great deal of trouble in getting across the stormy sea with his army of 40,000 soldiers, but at last a landing was made in Greece. Then the two armies had some skirmishing, but no great battle. This continued for months. Pompey at one time would gain the advantage, and Caesar at another time. But it was evident that neither of the great rivals was in any hurry to risk the chance of defeat in a general battle. They knew well that such a defeat would entirely ruin the one that was defeated. But at last the two armies met for battle on the plain of Pharsalia in Thessaly, a district of Greece. The soldiers on both sides were mostly armed with spears and broadswords. Some carried slings to hurl large stones, and others had bows and arrows. The greater part of the fighting, however, was done with swords. 80,000 men were engaged in the battle, about 40,000 on each side. It was a brave, heroic struggle, and lasted for hours. Both armies fought splendidly, but in the end Pompey's army was forced back to its camp after dreadful slaughter. For a few minutes the camp was bravely defended against the attacks of Caesar's soldiers, and then had to be abandoned. The battle did not last long after this. Pompey's great army was utterly beaten. Pompey himself, with a few followers, fled to the seashore and sailed across the Mediterranean to Egypt. There he was treacherously murdered by order of Ptolemy, the Egyptian king. Caesar gained a splendid victory at Pharsalia, but he was not yet master of the Roman Empire. The rich nobles and senators formed armies to fight him in Asia Minor, Africa, and Spain. Caesar went with an army to Asia Minor, attacked his enemies, and won a great battle at a place called Zela. This victory was so quickly gained that in sending news of it to Rome, Caesar wrote the famous dispatch, Veni, Vidi, Vici, which is, in English, I came, I saw, I conquered. He had equal success in Africa and Spain. In a very short time he destroyed the armies opposed to him. Then he returned to Rome, and had the grandest triumph ever seen in the city. The celebration lasted 4 days, and during that time Rome was in a high state of pleasant excitement. Thousands of persons from the surrounding country came to the city to witness the magnificent show. On each day there were splendid processions, in which there were great numbers of gorgeous chariots, drawn by beautiful horses and filled with Caesar's principal officers. Behind them marched hundreds of soldiers bearing banners on which were pictured scenes from Caesar's important battles. Herds of elephants and camels from Asia and Africa appeared in the procession, and there were also long lines of prisoners, carrying valuable articles obtained by Caesar in the lands he had conquered. In addition to the processions, many kinds of entertainments were provided for the people, such as plays, circus exhibitions, combats between gladiators, wild beast hunts, and chariot races. There were also feasts served to all the people of the city. It was a time of unbounded enjoyment, and delighted the Romans so much that they became very devoted to Caesar. There was now no opposition to him. Both the nobles and plebeians were willing, and even glad, to have him as their ruler. He was chosen dictator for life, and put in command of all the armies of the empire. He was called Imperator, which means emperor. The people gave him the title of Father of his country. Statues of him were erected in the public buildings and squares. A grand chair, made somewhat like a throne, was placed in the Senate chamber, and whenever he came to listen to the debates he sat in this chair as if he were king. Caesar now had laws passed making many improvements in the government. He also carried out a number of plans to make Rome of more importance as a commercial city. He erected magnificent buildings, made aqueducts to bring plenty of water to the city, established a great library, and did many other things which were of much benefit to the people. One of the most useful things he did was to make a new calendar. Before his time, the Romans had not a very clear knowledge as to the length of a year. At one time they had only 10 months in their year. Afterwards they had 12, but they counted only 365 days in every year. They did not know or did not give attention to the fact that the real length of the year is 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, 50 seconds. They did not reckon the extra hours, minutes, and seconds, and so their calendar got quite wrong in the course of a number of years. Caesar corrected the error by making 1 year in every 4 have 366 days, and the calendar thus corrected was called the Julian calendar. Caesar now possessed all the glory and power of a king, and it began to be believed that he wanted to be a king in reality. The Romans had not had a king for 500 years and would not have one. Their feelings against kings was so strong that none of the men who had ruled Rome, at times with almost kingly power, had ever dared to call himself king. One day an intimate friend of Caesar saluted him in public as king. Caesar replied, "I am not king, but only Caesar." Some of the nobles, however, felt certain that he meant to make himself king, and they formed a plot to kill him in the Senate house on the Ides of March, that is, on the 15th of March. The Romans had certain days in their months which they called calends, nones, and ides. One of the persons who made the plot against Caesar was Junius Brutus, a highly respected Roman. It is said that he was a descendant of the Junius Brutus who, 5 centuries before, had helped to overthrow the tyrant King Tarquin. Brutus was an intimate friend of Caesar, but he thought that Caesar intended to destroy the Republic by making himself king, and therefore he joined the plot against him. As the Ides of March drew near, the plan for putting Caesar to death was carefully arranged and settled. An augur, or fortune-teller, one day stopped Caesar in the street and said to him, "Beware the Ides of March." But the great conqueror laughed at the warning. On the appointed day the plotters met in the Senate chamber, ready to do the wicked deed they had planned. When Caesar entered the chamber, all present rose to greet him. He bowed and smiled pleasantly to the people, and took his usual seat. Now was the fatal moment. As had been arranged, one of the plotters went up to him with a request for the pardon of a prisoner. Then the rest crowded around his chair, as if to urge him to grant the request. Caesar seemed somewhat alarmed at the crowd, and rose from his chair. At this moment he was stabbed in the side with a sword. Then there were loud outcries in the chamber, and all was excitement and confusion. Caesar used his stylus to defend himself. The stylus was an instrument made of iron, with a sharp point on one end for writing on wax tablets, and with the other end smooth, for rubbing out a word when necessary. For writing on parchment or paper, a pen made of reed was used. Educated Romans carried their stylus and tablet in their pockets. From the name of the instrument the word style is now used to mean a particular manner of writing. Caesar had nothing but his stylus to defend himself with. He fought bravely, until he saw his friend Brutus coming to strike him. Then he cried out, "You too, Brutus?" and made no further resistance. They stabbed him until he fell dead. Then they went out of the Senate and through the streets of Rome with Brutus at their head. They told the people what they had done, and rejoiced at the deed. They said the death of Caesar saved the Roman Republic. But the people were very angry, and threatened to put to death those who had killed Caesar. They would have done this, only that Brutus and his friends fled from the city. There was a grand funeral service in honor of Caesar. The body was laid in the Forum, and a famous Roman named Mark Antony made an eloquent funeral speech over it. He praised Caesar, and spoke so bitterly against Brutus and his party that the people were more angry than ever. This Mark Antony was afterwards a very powerful man in Rome. Caesar died 44 years before Christ was born. Of course his death did not save the Roman Republic. It had indeed already ceased to exist in all but the name. Rome was no longer a republic, but an empire, and, as we shall see, the family of Caesar gave it its first emperor. All the emperors adopted the name of Caesar as part of their title. End of chapter 21.